Hey everyone, welcome to Birth Podcast. I'm Ash. Thank you for joining me. I am thrilled to introduce you to Mookie the Magnificent. She has an amazing Facebook page that has gotten really popular over the last few months. And one of the posts that helped put her on the map is a post where she held space for Black communities to be able to ask white communities any question that they wanted. Now, there were definitely a lot of fun questions like, why do white people wear flip-flops? Or why do white people like or eat certain foods? But there was also some serious questions there too. For example, why did white people make everything about them? Referring to Irish slaves every time that Black folks say Black Lives Matter. And conversations got intense, and they were funny, and they were interesting. But the most beautiful thing about the post is that there was such an incredible interaction between groups of people trying to find and grapple for some sense of unity. And Mookie is making every attempt to create that unity on her page and in the conversations that she's having. So I am really thrilled that you agreed to step on with me today and have this conversation. I think it's so important that we continue to, especially as a white woman and a Black woman, and having an opportunity to sort of come together in a different way amid all of the turmoil that's happening, which is just heartbreaking.
And thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure. I am honored. You know, when I got the question in my inbox, I was very excited. I've noticed you comment here and there. There's certain people that I remember, and you always make very poignant comments on my posts. And so, when you do post, and it always makes me happy. So like I said, I remember your name. So, it definitely is an honor for me to be here. So thank you again for having me.
Of course. I want to just jump in first and foremost and ask you a little bit about your background and also what led you to start your page, to kind of just give people an idea of you and how you come to be where you are right now. So tell me about that.
Okay. Well, I am originally from Alaska. When I tell people I'm from Alaska, they automatically assume I was a transplant to Alaska, but no, I was born and raised in Alaska. It was a pretty unique experience because, of course, most people that are up there that are of color have, military ties, which I do have military ties. My father was in the Air Force, but, my parents liked it. So he got out of the Air Force and he took a job in a small Alaska Native town called Dillingham, Alaska. So when I was about 5 years old, we moved to Dillingham from Anchorage, which was the main city. And we moved to Dillingham, and my father was a police officer there. We immediately noticed, because he didn't tell us beforehand, but we immediately noticed that we were a very minority in Dillingham. There was only 6 Black people in the town, and the town population was about 1,500 back then. So 6 Black people in a town of 1,500, and it was my family. Living there, we always experienced some type of racism, whether it was watching my father deal with, different people he was arresting that, would just say racial slurs, or, co-workers he worked with. I always, listened to different conversations that my parents had. So we always were very aware of race. We were always reminded, that we were Black people. It started for me at a young age. I just always noticed differences in people. But what I can say is that my parents never really, the way that we were raised, although we knew that we were the Black kids, we never were made to feel like we were less than, or, we were taught to be proud of who we were. When we did receive those racial slurs, they would explain to us, why we weren't that. Growing up in Dillingham really gave me, I guess, a lot more insight. And then when I moved back to Anchorage, I was about 13 years old. I kind of saw a flip. So although we dealt with a lot of racism growing up in Dillingham, when we got back to Anchorage, people were very racist towards Alaska Native people. and that was everyone. So it's adults, it's children, it's at school, and I'm seeing people that I went to school with in Dillingham come back over, to Anchorage, and they're dealing with the stuff that we dealt with when we were in Dillingham. So it's kind of a contrast in where I initially thought, well, hey, that's what they get. They teased me when I was in Dillingham. They called me the N-word. But I had to step back and say, that's not right. That's not how my parents would want me to act. So there was a girl who I saw, getting bullied because she's an Alaska Native, and they were saying some horrible things. I knew her from back in Dillingham, and I just invited her to sit down and have lunch with me. I was in the 10th grade. It was a small gesture really, but, I knew that she needed somebody to eat lunch with. And we ate lunch together for probably about a month until I felt like she, I introduced her to different people, until I felt like she actually was going to be okay. And that was when it kind of flipped for me, because like I said, when I was in Dillingham, I built up a lot of anger because I dealt with so much racism. So I felt like I hated all white people. I felt like I hated all Native people. But then when I got to Anchorage and I actually saw it reversed, it didn't make me feel any better. Even if it did cause me to have a lot of anger, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to do anything productive to make anybody else feel that way. I got really into Malcolm X at a young age. I started reading a lot of things about the civil rights movement. Of course, they always taught you about Martin Luther King Jr., which I love. But then when I started reading about the civil rights movement, I learned about Malcolm X, and then I started learning about the Black Panther Party. And I was educating myself because they didn't offer that in the schools. So since we didn't get Black history taught in school, I was always seeking it myself. And then, you had to be pretty privileged to have internet, and I didn't have internet, just yet. So I was always at the library, trying to learn more about Black history. And I actually got to take a Black history class my sophomore year in high school. After that, I had to know as much as I possibly could. And so like my mother would, buy me gift cards to Barnes and Noble. I would go to the library after school all the time. Like I just spent my time reading as much as I possibly could about history.
What was your first impression of Malcolm X? And the reason that I ask that is because, at least as a white person, I grew up, well, especially as a church person, you grew up, universally you, understanding King good, Malcolm bad. And it wasn't until I got older and studied for myself and looked into myself that I understood maybe the differences between them, but also the similarities between them, and the discrepancy in the messaging about Malcolm. What was some of your first impressions when you began reading and learning and understanding about Malcolm?
My first initial thoughts about Malcolm X was I just thought he was radical, and I couldn't believe the things he said about white people, so I'm like, oh my goodness. And then when I realized, the time frame in which he was saying these things, I was intrigued, but I really thought he was bad. That's my initial thought. It's like, oh my goodness, he shouldn't say that, that's really hateful. I didn't, of course, know full history of anything yet. Also my eyes were just starting to be opened to, the history, the dark history of America. At that time, all I really knew was, we had slavery, and slavery was bad. It was in nothing, that was deeply, taught. You just kind of got the surface of it. So when I started reading about Malcolm X, and then I went to see Malcolm X in the movie theater, it just changed my life. I think my mother probably thought that I was going crazy. She was buying me, I was buying nothing but Malcolm X clothes. Like my jackets had an X on it. My baseball cap had an X on it. I had fist earrings, I was all in. I was like, Mom, I need to buy the autobiography of Malcolm X. I don't want to get it from the library. She went and bought it for me. She took me to see the movie 3 different times, because I insisted on it. And that's when my sister started calling me Militant Mook. She says, she's like, you're Militant Mook. It's like, I kind of like that, so it stuck. She still calls me that to this day, Militant Mook. I really thought that he was so radical, but I just wanted to know more why he thought the way that he thought. And the more that I read, the more it just made a lot of sense to me. And then I was thinking about my own experiences with race, and my own experiences watching my father deal with, racism, because at one point, like I said, when we first moved to Dillingham, he was a sergeant on the force. And after a few years, he got promoted to the chief of police. And in my head, I'm thinking, you're the chief of police. You've got a lot of power, you shouldn't take any of these people's crap. But yet and still, I see him being disrespected by, people that live in the town, calling him the N-word, calling him a jigaboo, calling him all these different horrible names. And I just wonder, like, why are you taking this? His outlook was more, the peaceful, and my mother's from Chicago. She's more radical. She is, in your face. I bet you won't say that to me again. She is going to correct you the first time she hears something. But, my father takes a different approach with it, and he did. And so I was able to learn from both of them. I demand respect, but then I also don't allow myself to get emotional. And if I feel like something is too heavy, then I just take a couple days off. And what inspired me to start my page was actually, I wanted to have a safe space for Black women to congregate and, converse and, be artistic and learn from each other and celebrate each other. And so that's what my page was initially started for. When I posed that question, Black people ask white people, a question, it was really just, something being silly, breaking the ice, to just get a little bit more traffic on the, on the page. And it took off from there because we didn't realize that white people were really going to start answering the questions. Like that was like, we had this lady that she was answering every single question. So like in real time, because when I first started the page, I had two people that were helping me, and we're watching her answer the questions in real time. And every question we put up there or anybody else put up there, she was answering it. And we're like, wow. And then all of a sudden more people just started joining in, and it just exploded from there.
I mean, it's an incredible post because, and I will link to it in the description box for people who haven't seen it, but it was a question that was so perfect because from my perspective, there's a lot, first of all, egos get involved when it comes to talking about racial issues. And a lot of white egos get offended when culturally we're questioned about anything, whether it has to do with, liking Beyonce to just our own food to whatever. And so in a way, it sort of opened up this space to relax, to let loose, to understand there was no malice. But there were some serious questions, like I mentioned as well. And I think that it left such an impression on me. And I know I jumped in there and probably answered a few of them off the cuff and tried to be comedic about it, because it is. I mean, that's the thing. If we can't laugh at ourselves, if we can't hold ourselves to some sort of standard of comedy in the humor of all that we are, then I don't know, what are we doing? So I had a deep appreciation for the post. You had said that you had initially hoped, though, that the page itself was this place for Black women to gather, which is where I kind of want to go next. And that is, having a safe space where they could embody themselves and celebrate themselves, which is so deeply important. What did you feel was missing that you thought, I need this?
I just felt like I needed a community where I was able to really interact with other Black women and, like I said, share ideas and offer support, because there is this idea, if you will, that, we don't support each other, that we can't get along with each other. And I can't find that any further from the truth. I know so many Black women that they're uplifting. They want to help you out. They reach out to you. They check on you. So I have a great circle of Black women that I know. And I mean, even some that I've never met, that I actually met online in different groups that I met. And so I just wanted to have something that we all could, pour into and learn from each other with and support each other with, because again, like as we're seeing with, present times, it just gets heavy. And for Black women, we tend to put the brunt of all of that on our shoulders. We are worried about our Black men. So we're worried about our Black children. And then, somewhere in between there, we got to, find time to worry about ourselves as well. So initially I was I was not happy about how big that post was getting. I just was like, oh, I called my mom on the phone. I said, Mom, my page is being colonized. And she was like, what? I was like, I said, Mom, they are colonizing my page. This is not what I wanted. She's like, but she says, sweetheart, think about it now, this could be God giving you the opportunity to share, your testimony. You can share the things that you've experienced, because there were so many white people that were not just commenting on that post, they were in my inbox and they are asking me questions that they didn't feel comfortable asking on that post. They are asking me questions about being better ally. They're asking me questions about, dating interracially and what I think when I see that. They were asking me so many different questions. And I'm like, well, wow, maybe I can, just kind of change the direction I was going. Because I started answering the questions and people would just be so grateful that I would even take the time to answer the questions. And then my email, started blowing up when I created my email, because I didn't even have an email address yet when I started my page. Like I said, it was just really just organic, and I was just kind of doing it to uplift my sisters and, give encouraging words. And I didn't expect it to blow up like it did. It changed my way of how I look at, social activism and actually doing more to get white people to be allies. I think that white people are definitely important to the movement, and keeping that allyship is just important to me. It makes no sense for there to be a divide if we have that same common goal.
And I appreciate that. Studying Dr. King and Malcolm both, these are men who really leaned in toward the ones who were their true allies. And it is about all of us being able to lean in on each other, but then also understanding where the leadership needs to come from. And it needs to come from the people who are oppressed, who are saying this is what we need. As a white woman, I have to confess, I have to be open enough to say, the women's movement in particular in the US did not do a good job.
Not at all.
It failed. The women's movement, if we just go back, we'll just go back 100 years. Surely we could go back to enslavement as well, but you go back even 100 years and the women's suffrage that begins to fight for women to have the vote did not include Black women. It excluded Black women. It excluded free Black women. And there were even struggles in the 1960s because you had Black women who were fighting two fronts, both the front of racial injustice as well as gender injustice.
I think that we need to be heard. It's very simple. We can't be where we're leaned on in the time where it's beneficial, and then you pull back and leave us back here, and we're no longer at that table. That's where you see that animosity and the anger, because you do see a lot of Black women that feel completely excluded, so they will not claim feminism. Although they will fight for women's rights, they will not claim feminism because overall that feeling is of exclusion in a movement that doesn't seem like it was ever designed to include you completely. There is room for improvement within that movement. I think now we're seeing so much more change where people are having conversations where it's not uncomfortable. Because I do see, discomfort that many people have. Like I said, the interactions that I have, people, when they approach me in my inbox or they send an email, oftentimes start off with apologizing first. I apologize, or I hope I'm not, offending you. And, if you're not saying something that's just outwardly rude, there's no reason for you to apologize prior to the question. So that to me shows that there is some, that people are very worried about stepping on toes,
I wonder sometimes too, because we've been hearing this word white fragility a lot. It's being used a lot right now. And it's not new. It's not a new phrase, but it seems to be coming out as you sort of see white people trying to grapple with how to be an ally. And it's used a lot around women because there is a sense of sort of women's fragility. And I don't necessarily feel the necessity to apologize for who I am. I want to be humble. I want to be surrendered. I want to make sure that I'm listening and hearing and asking questions and being a participant, but I also want to be a participant rather than, the idea is to create a space of equality rather than of hierarchy. And
Exactly.
I think what happens is the fragility comes in this fear that often just leads to inaction. And I admit that there are times that it frustrates me a little bit, but I see it mostly among women who are so afraid because they know that these are problems, but they're not really stepping into their full confidence. So how do we create a space for that so that we can come together a little bit? Because I want it to be a unified space for Black women and white women to be able to take on these challenges together. We should.
It definitely needs to be changed. To touch on the white fragility, I think that one is, one of the main, kind of like it's the elephant in the room, if you will. When Black women speak, and oftentimes you're going to speak, well, as a Black woman, I speak very, confidently. People will say you're jazzy, or you have an attitude because, you're direct, or, I'm very, straight to the point. The decorum that is expected is a bit much, like we're not expected to speak passionately. When we're speaking passionately, it's taken offensively, whereas a white woman can speak passionately and it's passion. Like these are things that are really big issues to me. But if I say the same thing, it's just I'm passionate about something different. It's like, wait, you don't want to say it like that. So we need to come to a place where white women don't take so much they're not so defensive when it comes to conversation with Black women, and they don't feel intimidated by a conversation with a strong Black woman. It should never be any level of intimidation. We should be able to have that, that same respect. Like, you're a very strong woman. Our conversations before, I don't feel like you have any, trepidation with speaking with me. There's no intimidation there. There's a mutual respect, and it's easy to have a conversation with you. But that is not generally how it is when you're speaking about different issues with other white women. So
I wonder if that's just it's a need for white women to step into their confidence. It's something I'd like to see other white women do. Step into your confidence, step into who you are. Black women aren't scary, not at all. Coming from a tradition, coming from a land where there were a lot of matriarchal societies that were prominent in African villages and African tribes throughout history. This is something that I think, in a way, you proudly hold on to, that I feel white women may not understand in the same way, but perhaps could learn from. So, I guess my own encouragement to my own would be, look at Black women not with intimidation, but for inspiration, for the sake of the fact that the way that they hold themselves is the way that we can carry ourselves, And then when we all can do that together, we can actually make an enormous impact.
I love that we're seeing so many young leaders. We're seeing so many young leaders, and they're using their voices. They are not standing down. I love the power of social media because it's changing, how it's being reached.
You mentioned your daughters, and you've mentioned before going to a march with them. As a Black woman in America right now and raising daughters, what's the conversation that you're having with them? What was going out on a march like with them? Help me understand a little bit of that space for you.
I have 3 daughters. So I have a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, and a 15-year-old. My oldest daughter and my youngest daughter went with me to the second march. It took my breath away to see how passionate my daughters are about, seeing change. They're so passionate. To hear them talking to, strangers about their feelings about what it was like to see George Floyd murdered, to hear them speak about Sandra Bland, to hear them speak about Philando Castile. It makes me, I'm proud to know that I'm, being impactful in the right ways. When we were marching the other night, my youngest daughter was holding up her sign, and it just brought tears to my eyes. And then cars were driving by, and she'd throw up her fist, and I'm just like, oh, yay! It was kind of like her first steps, if you will. Like, oh, I was like, and then afterward, I said, how do you feel? Because I made sure to, get her home before it got too late. My youngest daughter was just like, Mommy, I really had a good time. I'm glad you had me come with you guys to my first protest. And that is something, that is going to stick with me. I'm just really proud.
That's actually fascinating. Your 15-year-old daughter saying my first protest. It's almost as if it's her coming of age is going to a protest. Her coming of age is fighting for her right to exist, which
exactly.
We celebrate it, but it's heartbreaking too. Like there's an element of it that like you celebrate because it's like, oh, you're becoming this independent young woman that knows what you deserve. Right. But at the same time, the fact that she has to fight for it. Right. Can I ask, what did her sign say? What was her sign?
Her sign says, you are here to serve and protect, keep your foot keep your foot off of our necks. That's what it said. Yes. Serve and protect, keep foot off our necks. And she, came to me the next morning. She's like, Mom, all my friends think it's pretty cool that I went to a protest. And they asked if next time you go, can they come with us? Can they come with us too? So I like that, she's sharing with, her peers, her experiences. She's standing up for what she believes in. She has a friend that, she went to school with since elementary, and she's a young white girl. They're very, very close. They don't go to the same school anymore, but they still keep in contact. Well, her friend actually called her the other night, and she was just in tears because another girl told her that Black lives didn't matter, and she was really upset about it. She said, no, it's just all lives matter. Black people are being selfish. They shouldn't say that. And so my youngest daughter's friend, had an interaction with her, but the girl, I guess cussed her out, called her some ugly names, and it didn't sit right with my youngest. It was eating at her. And so she went and she sent that girl a DM. And she sent the young lady a DM, and she just broke down things to her in the most articulate, beautiful way. And I was so proud, and it just brought tears to my eyes that she felt compelled to stand up for her friend, one. And she also knew her stuff to be able to share, some history with this young girl who was, saying hateful things online. And she was at first initially a little scared to send me what she sent to the young lady because she used a bad word. She's like, Mom, she's 15 now. I was cussing like a sailor at 15, but she's like, Mom, I did say a bad word, so I don't want you to be mad at me. I was like, well, what bad word was it? She said, I can't tell you. I was like, just tell me, say it. So, I finally got her to say it after like 5 minutes, and it was just shit, but
this shit, this whole circumstance that we are facing is shit.
It's shit, pure shit. And I just love that, she gave me a preemptive, hey, there's a cuss word in there. I don't want you to be upset or disappointed in me. But I was very proud of what she wrote, and she's going to use her voice, and she is, proud of who she is. It's just something that really brings a lot of joy to my heart.
It inspires me and breaks my heart at the same time. I think that's just because having been in a place like, Iraq and Palestine and Lebanon, and having seen 16-year-olds in very different circumstances or even similar circumstances. I'm not even going to say it's all that different. It's just a different way of expression. Let's put it that way. It's a different way of expression. Right. And, I will always remember when I was in Gaza in 2014, there was I would have guessed her. I never knew this for sure, but I would have guessed her to maybe be around 14. And we had gone out, a crew of us had gone out to the site where there had just been a bombing, maybe an hour or two before, to get pictures and video. And I'm videotaping the scene and getting pictures and trying to collect my story a little bit. And I feel this tap on my shoulder. And I turn around and there's this young girl. Like I said, I wouldn't have guessed, maybe older than 14, 13, 14, maybe, right in that area. And she points to my camera, and what I know that she wants is she wants to speak. So, okay. So, and in about 30 seconds in Arabic, and I got it properly translated later, so I understood it fully, because she spoke so passionately, and she lets it rip against the Israeli military. She says, "Are they dogs? Do they think that we're animals too? Do they want us dead?" And she's so angry and passionate and rightfully frustrated because her family's been subjected to this destruction in this open prison for so long. And she knows there's really no one having to tell her anything. She knows her house has been destroyed probably more than once.
Right.
Do they want us dead? Do they want us at war forever? And she kept pointing toward the border.
Wow.
And it had the greatest impact on me. And I've had many other different circumstances with young people over the course. I've met young child soldiers in Iraq and who were trained by some of the militia groups and stuff like that. But you see the passion in these kids, and that girl in particular, you saw this deep understanding, this deep knowing of what she was supposed to have and what she wasn't getting, which, it's always very interesting to me, because I know that the Black communities in the United States, a lot of the activist groups have actually aligned themselves with Palestinian causes. Angela Davis was actually very well known for that.
Absolutely.
But, to understand that teenagers, they see and understand far more than they're given credit for. And so the fact that you have the relationship with your daughter to kind of step in and help unpack that, which for a lot of teenagers who are losing their fathers, that ain't the case. Was it Jackson who talked about his 6-year-old daughter didn't want him to leave because she said, "Daddy, you need me"? I think that was in his speech the other day, where he talked about his 6-year-old daughter doesn't want him to go away because he needs her. And there's such a deep knowing in that small, tender voice that, and I think especially as women, we've got to really think about these kids.
Yeah, the children. Well, see, also, that's one thing I can say. In the Black community, our children are being forced to grow up sooner than what they should have to. That can be in terms of, growing up impoverished in the inner city, where, there's a lot of violence around them. So they have to worry about, that type of thing. They can't just go outside and play like regularly, so there's that side of it. And then there's also the side of, it could just be, a suburban Black kid and watching this death and destruction unfold every day almost on television, on social media. It's very traumatizing, and we have to have these conversations with our children that white parents don't have to have. Like my middle daughter, she's 21. She was at work when we went to that second protest. I probably wouldn't have taken her even if she had been off work, because she has an anxiety disorder and it's pretty severe. One of the things, she's had a gun pulled on her by a police officer before. She was in the car with a couple of her friends who are white, another Black kid, but her and the other Black kid were the ones who were pulled out of the car, and they rifled through her handbag, and they called me on the phone to come and get her, and she's like hyperventilating. I'm explaining to the officers that she has an anxiety disorder. Like, so if she is, she's acting, differently, it's not drugs, it's not alcohol, she has an anxiety disorder. And so her, things affect her differently. She can get upset, she can be crying, she can be shaking, she's very fair skinned, so her skin is going to start turning really red because of the stress. She breaks out in hives sometimes. So there's different things, and so that's something that's concerning for me. She's had 2 interactions with police officers here that were very negative, and that's a conversation that I've had to have with my children. When you are with your white friends, you're not looked at the same way that they're looked at. You are always going to be looked at as the perpetrator of whatever, may have occurred. You are always going to be looked at negatively. That's something like, how do we change that? You know,
Yeah.
how do we change that? You know, like, we are always going to be the guilty party, even if we're not the guilty party.
And that's a shift in
You
mindset. You know what I'm saying? I think that
know?
it's what I'm seeing is that in a way, like on a sociological level, we have to burn it all down and rebuild it because the system was built that way, that's so ingrained. And I hate that your daughter went through that. And I'm sorry that she went through that. That fucking sucks. And that's not okay.
Yeah.
That she has had to face off with police and which has probably only worsened her anxiety at times. And
Yes.
and that's traumatizing. That's trauma. And there's a lot of healing that needs to take place.
It really is ingrained in the system. So what about that? Like, we can't even have mental health or emotional health issues. You know, we always have to be able to, you know, quote unquote, comply. What if we're unable to comply? You know, my nephew, he's 16 years old. He's about 6'1", very handsome young man, and he's deaf. He's not going to be able to comply. He's not going to hear you. He's, you know, so these are the things that we are, you know, collectively having to deal with as a community. You know, my sister's sign, her sign at the march, you know, referred to her son being deaf. What about those people that have disabilities and they're not going to be able to communicate with you? They're not going to be able to comply. They're not going to be able to, you know, adhere to the orders that are being shouted at them. There's got to be some type of overhaul because they are continually just dropping black bodies like flies. And, you know, that is the problem. And, you know, that's where this uproar is coming from. And, you know, the anger, the pain, it feels like you're being gutted when you see it.
So in the spirit of maybe motherhood and womanhood, you know, because I know that there's a lot of women out there who are asking questions about what to do. And, you know, I'm of the belief that we've always known what to do, right? We know how to make the difference, but for those who are still trying to grapple with it, what would you say are some practical things or some practical steps that, you know, as far as women getting involved in these movements, in these protests, and in these strategies to step forward and be participants and take ownership of helping make changes? Because, you know, this is where it gets muddled. The protests happen and then they disappear and everybody forgets and people go back to fucking business as usual. But we can't do that this time.
Right.
We really, really can't. So you know, what's your advice?
My advice is, you know, it's pretty simple. You know, to be consistent. Don't be here today and gone tomorrow. You know, if this movement matters to people, they need to keep it on the forefront. You know, these are things that literally people that I'm in, you know, that are in my circles, we talk about regularly. So it's not just now. You know, it's not just the George Floyd. You know, we still talk about Tamir Rice. We talk about things that happened 30 years ago. We talk about Rodney King. We talk about all of these things still. You know, so you have to continue the conversations. You have to get involved where you can, where there's opportunities. So if there's nothing in your areas, create something. You know, if you live in a non-diverse area, man, reach out to some of these people that are, you know, online, that you can schedule a Zoom call. That's one of the things that I've started doing. I started scheduling Zoom calls with people that want to discuss race and they want to discuss their interactions with, you know, Black people, or, you know, how to do it or what they can do to help. And so I started having these calls so I can help kind of guide some people. You know, you have to read books. You can't just expect it to, you know, just kind of, I dream a genie, blink, and there you go, you got it. You're not going to get it that way because it's work. You know, it's definitely work. You have to, if you want to make a change, you have to be about making the change. It's going to take so many more. There's power in numbers. So it's going to take so many more of us to come together for there to really, you know, be change implemented. So, you know, you've got to read books. You've got to get uncomfortable and really delve into history and the history of this country and where this anger comes from. It's not just on the surface. Our pain is deeply rooted. There are so many different things that affect us generationally. So you think about the traumas that are passed down generationally. You think about, the wealth gap in this country. There are so many different things. Education, even now to this day, the disparities in education, the laws are, disproportionately affecting poor people, in the most horrific ways, and a lot of those poor people are people of color. So it's hard to break the cycle when you don't necessarily have, the finances to break those cycles. So a lot of things work hand in hand in our country. People do not want to acknowledge that.
Those of you who are looking to follow Mookie the Magnificent on Facebook, I will put the link in the description box so that you guys can find it and follow her page and join the conversation. Books and media are also put down there as well, so you guys can check those out and continue to be educated. Please leave your comments below to let us know what you think and where you are in this space. And may you live and move and have your being. Cheers.